Shalom and welcome to the European Report. Here we are in the European Parliament, in the heart of the European Union. And in today's programme, we are going to be discussing the EU's funding of UNRWA, that is the United Nations Relief Works Agency, and asking, is this value for money? And in today's programme, I'm joined by Peter Niedermüller, Hungarian MEP. So welcome to the programme.
Thank you. Also,
Michael McCann, the Director of Israel-Britain Alliance and representing the European Coalition for Israel, Ruth. Welcome to the programme. Michael, I'll start with you. So warm welcome to the European Report. It's great to have you on the programme. Can you please share with us what the UN agency does called UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, and from your perspective, what are your concerns?
Yeah, well, UNRWA was set up in 1949 and was given at that time a mandate, and there was also a political objective running alongside it. The mandate was to provide essential services, which in time turned into schools, hospitals, for the people who were governed by the organisation's mandate. Separately, the political objective was to reach a lasting and just settlement in the Middle East. Obviously, it followed the 1948 war, started when 5 Arab countries invaded the nascent Israel. The problem is that UNRWA has now become the antithesis of what it was designed to achieve, because, as Jared Kushner said recently, it's inefficient, corrupt, and it's now an obstacle for peace. The services that UNRWA provides should be provided by a state. You know, the British government, the Hungarian government, whichever government whichever country we're a part of, provides services like education and health, and UNRWA provides that. So it takes away that responsibility from the Palestinian leadership, so they can continue refusing to participate in peace negotiations to find that lasting and just settlement. And then what happens is that they're completely given up on their responsibility to look after their own people. Now we have a £1.2 billion mistake, mistake. That's how much it costs every year to run UNRWA. And let me tell you why it is a mistake in very simple terms. It's this, that a year after UNRWA was founded, the UN created the High Commission for Refugees. And they introduced a completely new set of rules, because they realised that the rules that founded UNRWA, which gives hereditary rights to refugees, which means that we now have 5.5 million refugees rather than the original 700,000 that were created by the war. That's why it's a mistake, because instead of solving the problems, UNRWA creates more problems and is now a business which people do not want to see stopping. They want to continue, which means taxpayers' money across the globe is being wasted in an organisation which will never ever find that lasting and just settlement it was originally designed and conceived to create.
And Ruth, thank you so much for standing in for Thomas Sandell. Now, there's a lot of discussion about the plight of the Palestinian refugees, but why do you think there's absolute silence when it comes to the plight of Jewish refugees from Arab lands who were forced out of their homes from 1948 to around 52, to the plight of 800,000, and many of them found themselves having to be absorbed into the new Jewish state. Billions were stolen from their businesses and their homes, and yet there's no recognition, nor is there any awareness of this incredible injustice by the international community. Why do you think this is the case?
Because simply, Simon, it is not about the refugees, and it's not about the plight of the refugees. It is only because the whole UNRWA business, just like Michael very correctly said, it is about a business, that it is about creating a problem for the new Jewish state that was created in 1948. We believe that the Jewish refugees, it was about more or less the equal amount of number of refugees, just like the Arab refugees of that time, and we believe that they never got any attention or any serious proposals about giving back what it was owed to them, or recognition of what happened to their history and the whole ethnic cleansing that happened from that region. And it is because it doesn't fit the narrative. It's as simple as that. It is a political narrative that they're trying to push, and it is one-sided one. And we will not see, I don't personally think we will see anytime soon any recognition of that 2,000 years history in the Middle East being wiped away, because the Jewish people are no longer able to live in many of the Middle Eastern countries and Northern Africa countries that they used to live in. No
problem, thank you. And Peter, warm welcome back to the programme, and just want to say it's great that we have such friends as you here in the European Parliament that we can rely on, and your support for Israel and the Jewish people is unprecedented. So thank you very much for that. Also, we have to say that you are a leading parliamentarian here in the European Parliament. What are your views on UNRWA, and should the European taxpayer continue to fund this organisation, knowing now that the EU is the largest contributor to UNRWA?
First of all, thank you for the invitation again. This is my pleasure to be here. I think so. There are two sides of the problem as far as I can see. On the one side, of course, we should appreciate the humanitarian work of UNRWA. There is no question of that. But the problem is, from my point of view, that UNRWA became a kind of political organization, not just dealing with humanitarian issues, but also with political issues. Just one example, I think so. I can see very clear signs of an anti-Israel approach at this organization, and I think so this is the problem. If it is a UN organization, and they would like to have EU support, in that case, UNRWA should be politically neutral. And this is absolutely not the case just now. And therefore, I think so, we have to monitor very, very carefully the activity of UNRWA. And of course, we should support everything and everybody who supports the peace process in the Middle East. But I am a little bit afraid that in the case of UNRWA, there are some other intention, and this is somehow a kind of political manipulation behind the activity of UNRWA, and therefore I think so we have to investigate very carefully what happens in this organization.
Very good. And Michael, why does the EU and EU member states continue to fund UNRWA, and particularly now is that the EU is now the largest contributor to this UN agency, particularly now that the Trump administration has pulled out all its funds from this organisation, especially when they failed to resettle refugees, created new generations of fake refugees, going almost into 3 or 4 generations, and at cost of billions of pounds and billions of euros.
Well, I think there's a mixture of wrong reasons, but there's also an overriding reason which is a genuine one, and it's something that Peter mentioned in response to the last question. There is a genuine recognition, and I visited the area as a non-parliamentarian and as a parliamentarian, and I got hands-on testimony from people on the ground. So I know that UNRWA does great works. I've met the kids in the schools who are getting great education. The problem is that many of the schools and hospitals are also used as bases for weaponry and used by Hamas and other terror groups. So there's there's a genuine desire to help people who are in need, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable position for people to take. But there's also a misguided sense of right and wrong, and it's because people have been fed a completely false narrative by Palestinian propagandists who feed this idea that somehow they're being mistreated by Israel and because of the status that they've created, having created 3 wars in 48, 67 and 73, and the annual toll of violence that it's been responsible for. But it blames everyone else, doesn't take responsibility for their own actions. So there's that misguided sense of right and wrong that a lot of our parliamentary democracies look at the whole question through the wrong prism. And finally, there's a self-loathing that is most keenly seen in Britain at the moment through the British Labour Party, a party that I was formerly part of, which is that there's a self-hate of the West, that somehow anything the West does is wrong, and therefore we should set our allegiances aside people who are against us. And it's most prominent within the British Labour Party through Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. But I can see that same type of behaviour being exhibited across the European Union. That's why countries like Sweden and others jump in to try and fill the void, but they miss the point in doing so. By providing or suggesting they're going to provide the finances that will fill the hole that the US creates, then they will in turn lead the Palestinians to the conclusion that they don't have to come to the negotiating table, and they can continue to rely on UNRWA to provide the civil society that they should be providing.
Absolutely. And Ruth, why do you think the international community blames Israel for the plight of the Palestinian refugee problem when the Palestinian leadership itself constantly call for the right of return? And in other words, that is code for destruction of the Jewish state. And why are they so silent about the treatment of Palestinians by their fellow Arab brothers when they're considered and treated like worse than third-class citizens?
Right. Basically, just like Michael said, there is the cost. There is a financial cost, and that is over $1 billion per year. But actually, the humanitarian cost, we do try to solve a humanitarian problem by creating UNRWA, but actually we'll create a much bigger one, because this is a perpetuation of a very sad reality. And there were millions of refugees at that time when the Ottoman Empire was dissolving and these new nations were forming. But the reality is, just like you said, that these Palestinian people have been treated as a third-class citizen in these refugee camps. They don't have the opportunity to move on with their lives, and they are used and manipulated by the leadership, the Palestinian leadership, but overall, beyond the Palestinian leadership, the Arab leadership, in order to be used as a pawn against Israel. And that is a very real humanitarian problem that needs to be dealt with, and it can only be dealt with by hard facts, basically, and saying the truth.
Absolutely. And Peter, sadly, the plight of the Palestinian refugees is very much an emotive issue. It's a sensitive issue, but it's also an issue that's used to attack Israel, particularly here in the European Parliament. But why is it that those MEPs that support the plight of the Palestinian refugees, support UNRWA, and others that take a very hostile position towards Israel, never ever talk about the plight of Palestinian refugees in the Arab world? For example, in Lebanon, where if you're a Palestinian refugee living in a refugee camp, you are stopped or prevented from having an education, university education that is, prevented from the top professions, and face unprecedented discrimination. Same in Syria, where the Assad regime has attacked and murdered over 4,000 Palestinians, and then Palestinians living in Iraq have faced the prospect of being ethnically cleansed, and yet the world is so silent when it comes to this issue. How important is it that we raise this issue if we truly care about the plight of the Palestinians?
It's absolutely true what you told us. I think so. We have to see that the Palestinian issue, also in the European Parliament, became an object of political and informational manipulation. This is very clear. We have many exhibitions, for example, about crying Palestinian children in Gaza. And we have never had any exhibition about crying Jewish children after an attack from Gaza or from any other Palestinian side. So I think so. This is really a way of blaming of Israel. You know, just to say, yeah, Israel is not human enough, Israel is not good enough, and therefore. They are these old taboos, and unfortunately, I have to say, these old taboos are very much rooted in the European left, and I am representing one of them because I belong to the S&D group. But I have to say, this is really an old European left taboo, just to use the Palestinian issue in order to blame Israel. This is one thing, but there's another thing. Of course, we know that, for example, the Palestinian Authority has textbooks teaching children to hate Israel and to hate Jewish people. And you know, if we have such kind of textbooks, how can we wait for a peace process, or how can we move the peace process forward?
Absolutely.
So I think so this is also the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority to take care on that issue, and of course to take care of the Palestinians living in Israel, or living in Lebanon or Syria, or what you mentioned. Nobody talks about the fate of these people. And I think so this is also our responsibility to make it very clearly. If we are talking about Palestinian issue, we usually use it as a symbolic weapon against Israel, and we have to change this kind of behavior.
Absolutely. What do you think can be done? Because I think this is an important subject, because obviously, we care about Israel, we care about the Palestinians, we care about the Arabs themselves, because we want to see a peaceful and stable Middle East. But in particular, when it comes down to the plight of Palestinian refugees in Arab lands, their treatment is absolutely horrendous. What do you think it's going to take to raise that awareness here in the European Parliament, Peter?
You know, I think so. First of all, we have to finish with the old taboos I mentioned before. You know, we have to open the doors and the windows, and we have to say, we in European Union, we have values, we have rights, we have fundamental principles, and we have to follow that also in the case of Palestinians, and not just to use this issue in blaming Israel or something like that. This is the one thing. And the second thing, of course, and I try to explain all the time, we have to change a little bit this this presentation of the process or the war or the situation in the Middle East, and not just to talk from the perspective of the Palestinians. We have to talk about from the perspectives of Israel, of the state of Israel. What does it mean for the Israeli people living in a situation like this? So I think so. We need real changes in our way of thinking on that.
Absolutely. And Michael, I'm just going to read out some of the shocking figures when it comes to the funding of UNRWA. I must look at figures for 2017. So the US last year was the largest contributor with over 322 million pounds. The EU was the second largest contributor to UNRWA with 107 million pounds or 120 million euros. The Saudi Arabia is the fifth on that list with 40 million or equivalent of 45 million euros. The next state is the United Arab Emirates with less than 10 million pounds. But it becomes very clear, I think even the Iranians is something like a ridiculously low figure, like 20,000 or so, that they put into the funding of UNRWA. Now, why is it the Arab world are failing when it comes to supporting UNRWA, and yet the Palestinians expect that Europe and the rest of the Western world to pick up that bill?
Well, it's simple. It's because there are nearly 200 nations in the United Nations. Around 50% of them are not democracies. And a lot of them don't pay a penny piece to any of these expensive missions across the globe. So therefore, when the US pays 22% of the total UN budget, and on top of that, UNRWA's on top of that, remember. The money that's spent there is separate from the money that they give annually in terms of their normal contributions. So therefore, it comes back to the mandate and the politics. UNRWA has been given a mandate to provide all these essential services, and they say that the politics of it to find a just settlement is not within their scope. However, as Peter alluded to, this week alone, a guy called John Guinness from UNRWA has been at the Labour Party conference in the UK explaining to people why it was important that Europe must fill the gap with the void that the US has created. So it seems to me that UNRWA officials, who are effectively civil servants, are actually getting involved in the political game that they claim that they haven't, they don't have a responsibility to get involved in. But the direct answer to your question is, if you're having the problem with the mandate is how is it to be changed when those around 200 nations in the United Nations will never vote for a mandate change, despite the fact that they've got no financial interest or financial contribution to bear as a result of the decisions that they will make. Look, the United Nations took over from the League of Nations. The League of Nations collapsed because nobody took it seriously. And the problem with the United Nations, despite the fact that, in my opinion, it's on life support, the bottom line is there is no other show in town. And that's why it continues. And until we deal with the fundamentals, we're not going to resolve any of these issues.
And Ruth, I mean, anyone who cares about Israel has to care about the plight of the Palestinian refugees living in squalor, considered third-class citizens, prevented from travel, prevented from entering into the professional jobs, prevented from going from university, not even given passports, and continually put in this kind of status as refugees and not being absorbed into the countries in which they've been forced out by their own Arab leaders back in 1948. How important is it that as supporters of Israel that we engage with our MEPs and the institutions within the European Parliament to raise this as a serious issue?
Obviously very important, and we do care about all the Palestinian people, including the ones who don't agree with our opinion. Actually, recently there was a very important and very interesting event here in the Parliament, and it was two members of the Palestinian, basically Arab Muslim speakers that came, and I had previously tried to bring them here in the European Parliament myself, and they both made the case, and they very honestly said what was the case. One of them is a Palestinian Arab journalist, Bassem Eid, which probably you know him, and the other one was a Jordanian Palestinian, and in effect he officially is a refugee. And he says that basically he has no rights in Jordan and how he is a second-class citizen. And because he does raise this issue in his own birth country, he had to leave the country. He now lives in the UK because otherwise he was going to be killed. It's as bad as that. And basically, we do have to raise the issue. Unfortunately, not every member of parliament is aware, but not everyone is just like MEP Niedermüller. Not everyone is fair enough or open enough to hear the other side. They are so used to that one-sided story that when you do tell them that there is suffering of the Palestinian people, that it is a direct result of the policies of the EU. Unfortunately, what we see is that either they blame Israel or they don't believe that we're telling them the truth. So it is about raising awareness again and about building the bridges. We have been trying to do that, and the brave people from the Palestinian side, that they are brave enough to cross the bridge together with us. Unfortunately, they face a lot of opposition, and some of them literal death sentences. And that is unacceptable. I don't see why the EU cannot condemn such a horrible treatment of human rights and saying that they care about the Palestinian people at the same time.
Absolutely. And Peter, how important is it that our viewers from across Europe contact MEPs like yourself to raise awareness about how our taxes are being abused by UNRWA and it's become a political weapon, and there's also silence when it comes to the plight of Palestinians across the Arab world who are considered worse than third-class citizens, and that is where the real apartheid is taking place?
You know, I think, and I try to explain all the time here in the Parliament, that this is not our duty to blame Israel or to blame the Palestinians or to blame it. We have to, and you told it, we have to build bridges, and we have to be objective, you know. And just now we have a very, very one-sided politics in the European Parliament. And this is not a good way to say that we are just taking care of the Palestinians because Israel is an occupational power. This is not the case. We have to, we need new approaches to this debate. And I think so it's very important, just once more to emphasize, with the help of old taboos, we will reach nothing. We need a new and fresh view on the issue. And therefore, I try to work all the time to bring Israel and Israeli views into the European Parliament, just to open a little bit the debate and to have more space for an open debate, because in all other cases, we will reach nothing.
Absolutely. And Michael, in the last less than 3 minutes of the programme, what difference do you think it would make for the European Union and its institutions, instead of investing in UNRWA, to actually invest in projects and works that bring about reconciliation between the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves?
Well, I think it's utterly crucial, but there's one overriding factor which I think has to be considered. And I used to be a trade union official. I used to negotiate pay, conditions of service. The one thing that's in every single negotiation is the clock. You have a time frame to work within. UNRWA will be 70 years old next year, and it's not produced that political settlement of a just and lasting peace. And why has it not produced it? Because UNRWA is a self-defeating exercise. Unless you bring the clock into the negotiations and force people to the negotiating table, then you're never going to get a solution. And one of the many people I used to speak to on the left of politics, I used to make this single point to them. Forget about the past. Forget about all your hatreds and issues. I'll forget about mine. Let's bring both parties to the negotiating table. And that's where the Palestinian leadership fails. Because if they really truly believe that the Americans, the British and everyone's against them, then there's one simple way to prove that. Come to the negotiating table, prove that you're willing to do a deal, and if the other side then prove to be intractable and not prepared to pursue peace, then you've got a right then to blame them. The bottom line is they've created a false narrative that the other side don't want peace. Israel stands ready to negotiate, and they should do the same.
Yeah. And Ruth, I mean, when we look at the situation in Syria with the civil war there, we have the biggest kind of refugee crisis since the end of World War II. And yet, because the funding of UNRWA is over $1 billion or just under £1 billion, isn't there a great danger then that resources to help genuine refugees, like the Syrian refugees, is not helping them because the funding is not available?
Absolutely, and again, it just shows, my understanding is that actually the Palestinian cause is the #1 aid destination from around the world. There's people not just in Syria, but other African countries, so there are many atrocities happening around the world that not only they don't get the money, they don't even get the media attention. While Assad was bombing south of Syria, there was zero interest from journalists or from politicians, even around here in the European Parliament, but all that was given to the Palestinian cause and to Gaza and so forth. So again, it is this injustice harms not only the Palestinians, but definitely very genuine people in the Middle East and Syria, obviously, where there are many South Syrian activists themselves and politicians who will tell you the same thing.
Ruth, Michael and MEP Peters, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the European Report. And I just want to thank you for watching this programme where we discuss the issue of the funding of UNRWA. What becomes clear is that we can't allow our taxes to be abused for a political agenda that does nothing to highlight the plight of genuine Palestinian refugees suffering in Arab countries where they're considered worse than third-class citizens. And this is where the concentration should be dealt with, and Arab leaders themselves need to be held to account, as well as EU funding these particular projects. So thank you for watching today's European Report.